Now, there are kids who are going to be detained, and there are kids who are going to be incarcerated. And we have to make sure that when we do that, that we are making sure that they are getting the educational, the mental health, the skills programming that they need. And we have to make sure another special population are kids with disabilities. And are we making sure that every single facility that we have is ADA and IDEA compliant? If we're not, then we have a problem. We have to make sure that we're providing for those kids so that when they get out, they have the same opportunity as every other child. Why would we ever put a juvenile in solitary confinement? Why would we ever take someone who we already know, and Dr. Steinberg will talk about, is not mature enough to make some of the decisions that need to be made? Why are we going to put them in a situation where they are likely to come out worse? We have to look real hard at why we, as a country, are going to do that. And we have to take a real close look at the 40,000 collateral consequences that the ABA counted for people who are formerly incarcerated. 40,000 collateral consequences. If you take a look at it, let me use a scientific word for them. They are silly. They are things that just simply do not make sense, that you are going to prevent a person from getting a job who is qualified for that job but made a mistake. Okay, they've made their mistake, they've paid their price. It is time now to give them an opportunity for themselves, an opportunity for their families, an opportunity for their communities.
There are legal implications of how kids are not adults, and that framework would be important in thinking about how to improve and change the juvenile justice system so that it was more fair, more just, more effective, and produce better outcomes for kids, their families, their communities. Juvenile justice reform, or juvenile systems change and improvement, it's not the same as having a scientific breakthrough that accomplishes dramatic changes overnight. It's something that you have to continuously work on. Because I'm confident that continued progress is possible, not only because of how far we've come, but how that progress was made with a broader coalition. It's not a partisan issue. It's about young, vulnerable people who make mistakes.
There are other things that influence this besides the brain development itself. There's a whole complex of experiences that young children have, traumas and exposures that they have, that actually affect brain architecture. A lot of this work is as old as 20 years ago, and yet it still amazes me how few people really know about this stuff. A lot of young people, and sometimes our highest risk young people, are growing up in communities where they're surrounded by violence. They may not experience the violence themselves, but it's occurring all around them, and that greatly affects their perceptions of the world. And in fact, there are some studies that are beginning to show that rates of post-traumatic stress disorder among teenagers growing up in violent inner-city communities rivals rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in military who are coming back from combat zones. It's enormously important that we think about the needs of these individual kids as they become involved with the criminal justice system, as they present in various ways. But we also have to understand that we also have to look at the communities they're living in and create strategies that promote systemic change in these communities. Because it's the integration of our individual approaches to these young people and the changes that we support and promote in their communities that are ultimately going to lead to healthy outcomes.
If you go to a bookstore and you look in the section where they have books for parents of adolescents, what you're going to see are a lot of survival guides. And most of those books have the word survive or survival in the title. Just last month, a new one came out. It's gotten a lot of press recently, and I was disappointed to see that the subtitle of this book is A Neuroscientist's Survival Guide for Parents. And I think that this survivor's mentality has adversely affected the way we treat kids in the justice system, in the education system, in the mental health system, and adversely affected the way that we as parents and educators and concerned adults interact with young people. And so a challenge for our justice system is not just how we deal with teenagers, but I think it's also how we deal with this new group of adolescents who really are in their early 20s. Brain plasticity during adolescence is a double-edged sword. It's an opportunity, but it's a vulnerability. Because the same features of the brain that make it capable to improve psychological and cognitive functioning for the better also make it easy for the brain to be harmed by exposure to toxic experiences and substances as well. Juvenile offenders are better candidates for rehabilitation than are people at a later age. And that helps to provide a rationale for having a rehabilitative orientation to juvenile justice rather than a punitive orientation. And let's not kid ourselves. Punishment is not rehabilitation. They're very, very different things with very different consequences.
Data suggests that young students who are expelled or suspended are as much as 10 times more likely to drop out of high school, experience academic failure and grade retention, hold negative school attitudes, and face incarceration from those who are not. Exclusionary discipline practices tend to disproportionately impact students of color and students with disabilities. So nationwide, data collected by our Office for Civil Rights show that African American students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students. In order to weaken the school-to-prison pipeline, educators and administrators really must ensure that clear, consistent, and appropriate expectations and consequences are in place to prevent and address misbehavior. Educational options available to incarcerated youth, we have learned very tremendously, both in scope and in quality. And so for this population to be successful as they exit the juvenile justice system, and by that I mean that they would not recidivate, they actually need access to education and employment opportunities of very, very high quality. And some of the great research that has taken place over the last couple of years has indicated that career-oriented education and training programs are actually an extremely effective intervention.
A little over a third of the adolescents in the United States are young people of color, particularly talking about African Americans and Latinos. About a third of the population, but about 2/3 of those who are locked up. So it's an easy piece of data and tells us there's something going on that we ought to be concerned about. Youth of color are treated more harshly than white adolescents at the points of arrest, detention, transfer to adult court, and commitment to state facilities, even when they're charged with the same offenses.